So, part two, logistics of guest shooters at a retreat location. We've talked at length about beds, bathrooms, basics, sewer, water, electrical, trash, parking, maintenance facilities. Let's talk about food, okay? When somebody is traveling, you've got vehicle capacity issues. Now, a lot of times when you're talking about, let's say I did a video using a small SUV with less than a 3-month supply of freeze-dried fruit in the back. Let's say that SUV was represented by this vehicle here. That was me traveling alone, so there's no passenger. Let's say I traveled with a utility trailer full of stuff. That vehicle has now, if I'm traveling in a small 4-cylinder SUV with a utility trailer, I have reduced vehicle performance. All I'm going to be doing is driving. If I'm just driving, I also have to multitask. I have to multitask navigation. If GPS is down, then I've got an issue. Hopefully I'm just following a convoy. If not, I really do need to bring a co-driver. The co-driver is going to have their own logistical needs, their own food supply. Guess what? That doubles everything, doesn't it? When we look at that, we look at just basics is roughly 2 tons per man per year. That's already over the capacity, the carrying capacity of that vehicle, unless you're traveling in vehicles like this, which means pre-positioned supplies. Again, it may fall on the retreat host. Now, when we talk about those gun-heavy survivalists versus those who have all these other things lined up, also look at the fact that food, when we talk about food preparation, okay, I'm going to break it really down to something. The value of what somebody's bringing to the table. Food, roughly, generally, as a general rule, in bulk, $2 a pound, okay? And then you're looking at roughly 2 tons per person per year. Now that's 4,000 pounds, okay? Roughly $4,000 food per person per year. Now there's a whole lot of people who are going to choke and gaff at that and say, hey, wait a minute, we can eat on a hell of a lot less. You can eat on a hell of a lot less. The question is, you know, we also need to be talking about the toilet paper, the dish soap, a lot of other stuff that somebody's going to be using. You can eat for less if you plan ahead to live mainly on rice and beans. Now, if you're going to forage as a group and things like that, that's another thing. But if you're actually carrying that on average, whether it's cases of MREs or Mountain House food or something like that, you're going to be at around $2 a pound for what you spent versus the cargo weight and cargo capacity of your vehicles. For somebody who's bringing guns, ammo, and tactical gear to the table, that's $100 a pound on average. Okay, very much on average. That's a very rough average. That's considering an assault rifle, a 6 to 8 pound assault rifle, $600 to $800. You're talking about ammunition, roughly $100 a pound, especially during a crisis situation. Again, kind of a general outside rule of thumb that if you have the storage capacity and the carrying capacity for personnel of having a lot of food around, you could expect that if somebody's coming to the table with professional grade hardware, that's about where your trade ratio is. And it's not a question of the gun guy's giving up his guns and you're giving up your food to make a deal. It's a question of what it's going to take to sustain people, and also what it's going to take to sustain the security and longevity of that food supply. When you're talking about tools and economic productivity, $40 to $60 a pound. Again, if you're talking about what somebody's bringing to the table. Fuel, $1 to $2 a pound when you consider 8 pounds to the gallon, and fuel would have an inflated value during a shit hit the fan situation. Also, firewood will count a little bit differently. So I'm talking about diesel, gasoline, propane, things like that. Firewood we will calculate differently, although let's say a 5-pound fire log, you know, that's not $5. Okay, so these are generally, you know, general rules. So why don't we look at the other logistics on this? Okay, so if you're going to bring a lot of people, let's say you are trying to be particularly fuel efficient, you're bringing a lot of people, more people means less supplies. If you pack a lot of low-cost supplies, you have the volume for that, you should be able to host more people if you have beds, bathrooms, and basic lined up. Now, when we talk about somebody who's bugging out to your location, well, that's a situation where you need to make it very clear what somebody's bringing along. Yeah, they do need to bring something to the table. Yes, if they bring professional grade weapons, skills, and experience to the table, that has value at, roughly the value that I put here. Um, it's a little bit more valuable than tools, but it's definitely not going to replace anything. It's going to supplement those things. And when you're talking about bringing vehicles, basically if they come in an SUV, that's 4 to 6 seats. Again, when I'm looking at somebody bringing sufficient supplies, if they come in an SUV and you're placing limitations on how many vehicles can come, well, then we start to need reducing a lot of this stuff to just the driver, right? Just the owner of that vehicle and the driver, no additional people, and just supplies. Now, how likely is that? Well, people have families, right? People have families. Are you going to expect them to abandon their families to come along? That's where things get really dicey, isn't it? And if you are not capable of supplying a lot of the extra supplies for the people, you're not going to get the added shooters. Okay, that's reality, and you're going to need the added shooters in order to run an effective security operation, and that's not even getting into effective workers, which is going to be additional people, and you're going to have a lot of dual purpose people, workers who are shooters, that you're going to need, and they cannot possibly carry enough food to fully sustain themselves the whole time. That has to be the responsibility of those who pre-positioned those supplies and those who are running a self-sustaining situation such as a farm, which is capable of running on a low fuel usage, highly labor intensive environment. So we look at the pickup truck, 2 to 3 seats. That's not counting the new style 4-door pickup trucks, which I'm really going to count in the SUV category. Vans, 2 to 12 seats. So when you coordinate a vehicle convoy, I'll be dealing with coordinating convoys in a separate video. But when you're talking about gun-heavy survivalists, if you don't have sufficient parking facilities and things for those people, then you're actually almost asking them to leave their supplies behind, which may also be a disservice to everybody involved. Now, when people do show up, you've also got calorie requirements, food requirements, things like that. Basically, U.S. military has done a lot of research, and they pretty much put the optimum combat and work-related diet at around 4,500 calories a day. If you go above 6,500 calories a day, you need to be making the people work really hard, or you have the possibility of getting lazy and gaining weight, although they may have high morale at that diet level. Navy SEALs during BUDS training, during particularly unusually grueling training where they're also having to deal with hypothermia, fighting off hypothermia, and they're burning a lot of calories under those circumstances, they can go up to 10,000 calories a day. 3,500 calories a day, that's generally somebody who's on a diet and doing sedentary work, but it can function. 2,500 calories a day, you're going to be looking at people who have reduced performance. It is sustainable, but you are going to have to live with the fact that the people they're going to have reduced performance. They may have a reduced effectiveness on their immune systems. They may have tiredness or sleep issues. You go below 2,500 calories a day, you might start having problems with people. If you go below 1,200 calories a day, you need to remove people from the situation. And generally, you're going to diplomatically start sending people down the road, whether they want to go or not. And that's going to have to be a situation when everybody's below 1,200 calories a day. You're basically beginning the stages of starvation. When you have a sustainable equilibrium of the people that you have, and again, what we do is we need to predict our food consumption, food production, and trade income. to keep people at these at the 4,500 calorie level for physically active people, 3,500 for sedentary working people. As soon as your projections run short of that, you need to look at reducing the retreat population as diplomatically as possible, which usually just means, sending people home or sending them on to other foraging operations, where foraging operations become a higher priority. If you want to attract the people, there would be a compensation situation. Also, in a coordinated retreat situation, and what John Wesley Rawls talks about in the Patriot series was that the retreats there have no wages and no rent, which means that as you have the people coming in, they should have no expectation of wages. They're not going to have any expectation of having being able to leave with a wage. Okay, it's a survival situation. It's not a job. If you are hiring people on a professional basis, then everybody needs to agree. That means everybody needs to agree that those services are necessary and worth paying for. And under those circumstances, then you would consider hiring outside professionals. At that point, however, you have to consider those outside professionals to eventually either leave or change their relationship and stop charging for their services. You are not charging anybody rent. Okay, so you're not paying any wages. You're also not charging any rent. The food situation is a shared situation. That's something where everybody ought to be bringing something to the table and working for it. But if it's not there, you can't give it. So that's one of those dicey situations you need to look into very carefully. If you are having an effective economy at the survival retreat, I said no wages, no rent. I do believe in profit sharing. So let's say you have a sustainably operating farm as a survival retreat, and that farm is producing income, then you do profit sharing. Okay, we're not doing a fixed wage, but we are going to have to consider profit sharing. And it is based on arrangements. Okay, you may vote on it, you may have the owner decide on it, you may do something like that. So there is always going to be some potential for income based on profit sharing. There would also have to be a very strong consensus on what activities are going to be involved with that. So that gets into a little bit on these two-part series on the logistics of bringing additional people during a shit-hit-the-fan type situation. If you have any questions, please put them in the comments section. I will make follow-up videos as this develops further, especially as people voice questions, comments, and concerns.